This is J. Krishnamurti's third public talk in Saanen, 1969.
We will continue with what we were talking about the other day. It seems to me it's really a very important question to ask ourselves. What is the beginning of sorrow, and whether at all it is possible to end sorrow? I do not know if you have gone into it sufficiently in the last 2 days, whether you have found out for yourself how it begins, and whether it has ever an ending of it. If you have, I'm sure you must have asked yourself whether it has anything to do with love. And pleasure. And what is the nature of love, pleasure, and the expanding emotions that one so enjoys, that one cherishes, demanding more and more? Whether love, pleasure have any relationship to the enormous burden of sorrow. And in asking that question, we have to bear in mind also certain obvious facts. Whether man, who has walked on the moon, most extraordinary feat technologically, whether man can fundamentally, very deeply, radically change. We fall into certain grooves of habit, of thought, certain exaggerations, misrepresentations, slackness of speech, indifference, sensitive to oneself, what other people say about oneself, but indifferent and callous what happens to others. We fall into these grooves, into these habits, and probably we don't even know that we are caught in those habits. And if we don't radically change, even superficially, even the intellectual habit of certain conclusions, ideas and pursuits, I do not see how you can go very deeply into this question of sorrow. Then, if you do, it becomes merely theoretical, verbal, intellectual, and have very little meaning. It's like a man who is everlastingly planning to build a house and never builds a house. So, unless we bear in mind all the time, not only actually, but be aware of the immense necessity of change, not according to any particular formula or design or principle, but in the very inquiry, exploration of what sorrow is, you're bound to inevitably come upon this point of vital change, and the change of which brings about urgency, intensity, the passion, the energy that one requires to go into this question of sorrow. You know, great many philosophers and religious teachers have talked about sorrow. I really don't know what they have said, and it really doesn't matter what they have said. No, how the whole Christendom worships sorrow in a person, because they have not been able to solve it. And there too, it doesn't matter what Christendom has done, enshrined sorrow. And the Asiatics, including the Indians, have given various forms of explanations of sorrow, including karma and so on, which equally doesn't matter, because they're all theories, good intentions. But when we are deeply concerned with this question, because unless there is an ending to sorrow, not only the human sorrow, the tears, the agony, the utter despair, the meaninglessness of this stupid life that one leads, the sorrow of death, the sorrow of self-pity, the sorrow of loneliness, the sorrow of never understanding anything but always living in darkness, in confusion, in strife and grief. And also there is the sorrow of ignorance. Not the ignorance of books, but the ignorance of what one is. Never discovering the beauty that lies behind all this travail and anxiety, to go through oneself very, very, very deeply, and to be ignorant of all that, of the immense treasure that lies within oneself, is also an immense sorrow. And in pursuing the understanding of sorrow, is it not necessary to see what love is? You know, what I say has very little value. I am not an authority to any of you. And if you make what is being said into authority, then you might just as well jump in the lake. Or if what is being said you repeat endlessly, either for propagandistic reasons, then you are merely telling lies. Or merely using these words to entertain yourself and your friends. Again, you are just wasting the beauty of a morning. The speaker is just suggesting, asking you to look, never accepting, never disregarding, never rejecting, but to observe whether love has any relationship to sorrow. And we know more or less, because most of us have had some kind of sorrow. Sorrow of someone dying, the sorrow of loneliness, the sorrow of never seeing anything clearly, beautifully as it is, the sorrow of one's own incapacity, the lack of intelligence, brightness and clarity. We know what sorrow is, more or less. And do we understand what love is? Not the theory of it, not the speculative conclusions about it, not what the religions, the priests, the philosophers, the theologians, the psychologists, all those people have said. Again, it has very little value what they have said. One has to find out what it is for oneself. When you discover what it is for yourself, then it is something that is incorruptible, in which there is no conflict, no sense of striving. So I think it is very important to find out what it is and not come to any intellectual conclusion. Obviously, the conclusion, the description, is not the described. So what is it? That is, what is love? And what is pleasure? And what is sorrow? I think those three are related. Not as something separate, divided, but to be taken as a whole. So when we are trying to understand what love is, That's a strange word, understand. You can't understand what love is. You either know it or you don't know it. You can't speculate about it. It defies all intellectual approach to it. And to see what it is, one must see what it is not. I think that's where our difficulty is going to be, what it is not. Because I think the negation of the false is the uncovering of the true. Unless one knows the structure and the nature of that which is not, and thereby completely put it aside without any effort, then in that lies the truth of what love is. So, we are not going to posit, which again is so absurd, what love is. But we will try to find out, if we can, what it is not. And therefore, in denying what is considered the positive, then you come to that which may be a total negation of the positive, which is love. Are we communicating with each other? Obviously, emotion in any form is not love. Because emotion can be cultivated, expanded, evolved, grow, sustained. And love is not something that is of time, that can evolve. Like pleasure, it can be enlarged, sought after. So, any form of emotion, sentimentality, which most of us live on, is not love. Do you accept that? Don't shake your head, please. If you see the truth of it, all the emotional sentiments as nationalism, as war, as the religious approach to life, which are all based on sentiment and emotion, the division between people, the black and the white and the pink and the blue and the south and the north and all that emotional rubbish. In which we indulge anger, jealousy, the sense of feeling superior, emotions which play such extraordinary important part in our life. When that exists, the other is not. And see how extraordinarily difficult it is to find out if there is no emotionality at all, what tenderness means. What goodness means. To be kind, to be generous, without any sense of emotion involved in it. And can one live that way? Unless one understands this profoundly, the ending of sorrow is not possible. Because prejudice, opinions, conclusions are our daily bread. Of like and dislike, grudges. They're all contained in that word emotion, sentiment. And it is the lot of our daily life. I like you and I don't like you because you have talked against me. And we live like that. And when you understand the depth of this absurd emotional approach to life, do you also banish kindliness? The very quality of concern which is tenderness. The goodness which flowers and that has nothing whatsoever to do with the emotions, with desire. Is that possible at all in life, to live that way? Always living with facts, without any sense of emotional interpretation of that fact. Do go into it as the speaker is explaining. Look at it. Have the patience. Be involved in it. And you'll find out. And has pleasure anything to do with love? This is a very serious question. Pleasure as a particular temperament in which you're caught. It's my temperament, my way of looking. My approach. And has pleasure, which most of us are seeking continuously. Has it any relationship, any validity where love is concerned? what do you say? Pleasure is part of desire. Please bear in mind, we are not saying you must not have pleasure. Or you must be desireless, which is absurd. That's what the monks throughout the world have sustained, that you must be without desire. Which is, when you go into it, is obviously sheer nonsense. But when you begin to examine the desire and pleasure, and have studied the nature and the structure of desire and pleasure, then do you discard pleasure, discard desire, or do you find a totally different way of living in which pleasure doesn't become the most important thing in life? And in understanding what pleasure is, on which all our moral values are based, perhaps you'll have to find out, like the origin, the beginning of sorrow, you have to find out what the beginning of pleasure is. For most of us, love is associated with sex. Or it's the love of humanity, love of truth, love of God. I don't know what all that means. Love of God, what does that mean? First of all, do you know what God is? Or is just an idea which 2,000 or 10,000 years of propaganda has conditioned? The communists say, don't talk such rubbish, because they are conditioned that way. And what is pleasure? Why is it so important in our lives? Associated with sex, which is called, this pleasure is called love. You know, pleasure takes so many forms. There are the minor pleasures, looking at a tree, watching when you're sitting in a restaurant, people pass by, especially if you're young, watching the girls. Or talking about others. If you go a little deeper, pleasure is the demand for more experience, Because our life is so empty of rich experiences, whatever the rich experiences are. We have got used to so many experiences, and therefore we turn to something which we call transcendental experience, which is another supreme form of pleasure. Therefore you take drugs, destroying your sensitivity, your brain, your body, in the demand for wider, deeper experiences. Perhaps we shall go into that when we talk about meditation. And there is the pleasure of seeking, searching, wanting to find out what truth is, as though a petty little mind full of pleasure, anger, bitterness, exaggeration. Can such a mind, can it ever seek truth? And yet, in the assertion that one is seeking truth, there is a great pleasure in it. There is the sexual pleasure, which you all know. And has that got to do anything with love? Pleasure demands possession. My house, my wife, my family, my country, my God, my beliefs. Pleasure not only cultivates possessiveness but also dependency. Please follow all this. I depend on my wife to give me pleasure, or the girl or the boy or God knows what else. I live in that emotional state which I call love, which I defend. And you may be tender in your sexual relationships and limit your tenderness only there in the bedroom or in the house, in the family. And you're not tender outside it, in your office, in your assertions. When you kill an animal to eat, are you tender? And yet that's the habit we have. So when you limit love to sex and possessiveness and dependency, then you become callous of the world, of what is happening around you. Then you are self-centered. All your activities spring from that self, the me. The higher self, with capital letter, is nonsense, invented by the mind. So you divide the world into the me with all its pettiness, the higher self with all its glory, which is invented by the pettiness of the mind. So, is pleasure in which all these things are involved, emotion, desire, possessiveness, dependency, jealousy, anger, and all the brutal violence of the world is involved in that one word. And the morality which has become so highly respectable, and when you look at it, it's so utterly immoral. And it has that pleasure, has it any relationship with love and sorrow? Please don't wait for me to answer it. And if the speaker answers it or explains it as he will, and when you depend on that explanation on the speaker, then you have only ashes left in your hand and nothing else. And in that there is great sorrow. So what is pleasure? How does it begin? And why does the mind cling to it so desperately? The pleasure of good looks, the pleasure of being able to, the pleasure, the excitement, the emotional thing involved in it. The pleasure of tomorrow, the sexual pleasure that's going to come tomorrow, based on the image, the thought, the experience of yesterday. Which we call love. So is love the thing of time, the thing of pleasure, or it has nothing whatever to do with it? And when one understands, when there is this quality of love, then pleasure has quite a different meaning. But if you insist having pleasure first and then try to find out what love is, then you will never find it. Because you are then giving emphasis that leads to great confusion, great misery. Because pleasure is part of fear. This is the other side of the coin. While the mind pursues pleasure, you're also inviting pain. Isn't that obvious? Huh? I want sexual pleasure tomorrow. And I depend on it. I must have it. And the person with whom you have it may turn against you then there is pain, anxiety. Therefore you must possess that person. It's yours. Legally, morally, respectably. And there is always this shadow of pain which is fear. We all know this, don't we? No? This is our daily business. But we have never gone into it. We accept it. We have never looked into it. We have never given our heart to understand the meaning of all this. We just live on the surface, which becomes another habit. So we don't know what it means to be serious, except to have a long face and grow whatever you do to be serious. Play with words. Quote some authority and you think that's awfully serious. So, where there is pleasure, there is pain and fear. So has pain and fear anything to do with love? Jealousy, anxiety, the sense of domination, these are all emotional things. Has love, has all that any relationship with that thing which we call love? If one has not really deeply gone into it, you are saying I love somebody has no meaning whatsoever. Because you will not brook any interference. You will not have anybody touch that which you have, which you possess, which gives you pleasure. It's yours. And therefore look what is happening. Therefore the younger generation says, well, let's live sexually free, as though they have solved this problem. But they are still pursuing pleasure, and therefore they are caught in the trap of fear. Right? Is it too hot for you this morning? It's hot at this platform here. Because you see, the speaker takes all this dreadfully seriously. He lives with it day and night. Whereas a person who is not serious, earnest in that sense which we are talking about, is not living. You may come to all these meetings year after year, then it will be an entertainment, unless you fundamentally, deeply change. So, we're asking three fundamental questions of life. What is love? What is pleasure, pain and fear? And what is sorrow? And the ending of sorrow. You must be able to answer this to yourself in your heart, not some verbal explanation, and get away with it. Then you do, if you do, you're a hypocrite. And the hypocrite is found out very soon. Is it time? Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, it doesn't matter, sir. Leave it. No, don't do it. Don't do it. I've got hay fever. So what is the beginning of pleasure? How does it come? And why does the mind seek it everlastingly? In the name of truth, in the name of morality, in the name of love, in the name of God, in the name of communism, in the name of your king or your beastly little queen or whatever it is. What does the mind, please go into it with the speaker. Why does the mind want this thing? From the moment you wake up till you go to sleep, and in sleep also, the dreams, the pleasurable, the painful, all that, the whole of life is based on this. And how does one inquire into this? And who is the entity that is going to inquire, to examine, to probe into this tremendous complex problem of pleasure, pain, love and sorrow? Who is going to explore it? Please do understand this. Is my mind capable of examining it? My mind, which is so prejudiced, so conditioned, which has so many theories, twisted, tortured. Can that mind analyze all this? Does the answer lie through analysis? If it doesn't lie through analysis, then how shall the mind grasp this thing? Because it is a tremendously complex thing. Conceivable, I'll get rid of pleasure, I'll be free of sex, or I will indulge sex, or I will, etc. That would be too childish. What is the nature of observation, which is whole, complete, total, not partial, not fragmented? And when you do look with the fragmented mind, then you cannot possibly see all the complexity of it, and to see the whole of it without fragmentation. You understand the question? I am asking, the speaker is asking, what is the instrument that will look, observe, and understand totally this whole problem? If you take time over it, that is, study it, examine it, analyze it, all that is implying time, that means many days, many years. Is that the way to do it? Because if that is the way, many things are implied in it. There are other factors which come and interfere, influences your emotional states and so on and so on. And if that is not the way, and it isn't the way, this perpetual analysis has no meaning whatsoever. Then what shall I do? How shall I have an eye that sees clearly, without any distortion, this immense complex problem of living, in which there is this thing called love, pleasure, pain, fear, and the immense burden of sorrow? What is your answer? Don't invent something. Don't repeat what somebody else has said, even what the speaker has said. If you repeat, at least don't repeat ever what the speaker has said. Repeat others. But don't repeat the poor speaker. Then you become merely a follower. Then if you are a follower, you destroy yourself and the speaker. So how do you find out? Yes, it's hot, isn't it? Have you the energy to go on? Huh? Have you? You say, this is my life, not your life. This is the way I live, so I can go on. Though it's physically tiring, it is there always. So it's no problem to me. But it is a problem to you, because you don't know what to do with the thing in front of you. Sorrow and the ending of sorrow, is the most beautiful thing. Words, sorrow, and the ending of it. So that the mind and the heart are everlastingly clean, unspotted, And that can only happen when you understand pleasure, fear and pain. So we have to find out what is the beginning of pain. How does it pleasure? Why does the mind cling to it? I think I better stop at this point. We'll continue, if you don't mind, on Thursday morning. You don't want me to stop? Are you just by any chance listening? Hearing just a lot of words? Are you also sweating as I am? So look, one wants to look at those mountains, those hills and green fields, as though you were looking at it for the first time, as though you were seeing the beauty of the shadow of that mountain on the green field, with eyes that have never before looked. In the same way, to look at pleasure, to look at this enormous pain, both the physical and psychological, and the thing called fear. See it all as though for the first time. If you can't look at the mountains and the running waters and the bird with its curving wings as though for the first time, I don't think you'll be able to look at this question of pleasure non-emotionally. Without any prejudice, without any bias. The looking at the mountain and looking at pleasure are exactly the same thing. They are not two separate things. And in that lies great beauty. There is the ecstasy of life. To see the mountain of an evening and to see the extraordinary nature of pleasure, fear, not as something separate. Then you will know the ending of sorrow. So we said, what is the beginning of pleasure? This extraordinary excitement, this emotion, which is ever expanding, wanting more, more, more. Have you ever considered how thought begins? have ever watched one thought and gone into it? From the moment it is born to the moment of its beginning. You have a thought. And have you ever traced it, looked at it so that the beginning, the middle and the end are seen as a whole thing? Have you ever done it? No? Because I have to, unless I understand the nature of thought, how can I understand pleasure or fear? And has thought got to do anything with love? And unless the mind has really looked into this question of what is the beginning and what is thought, how can you understand what pleasure is? So we have now to ask ourselves, see how complex it all is. But if you look at it, it's not complex at all. It is so simple. I really mean it. It's so simple if you know how to look. But to look, there must be the art of seeing. We won't go into that now. What is thinking? And what is the need of thinking? And why do we worship thought? Not only your particular thought, but the thought of the world. What the great thinkers have said. What the thinkers, whether it's Jesus, Buddha, whoever it is, Marx, Engels, why do we give such extraordinary importance to this? I was going to say birds. Why? Somebody writes a book about, I don't know what, Zen. Very clever book. And probably doesn't know a thing about it all. He has studied it, quotes what the others have said, compares it, writes it very cleverly, and he becomes an authority. And you read it, and if you are silly enough to read it, you find you are caught in it. So we worship thought, the intellect. Why? Why don't you worship the mountain? It doesn't mean that you must go back to nature, live in open air and have one meal a day and go about naked. Why this enormous importance to thought? And also there are those who say, kill the mind, kill thought, live emotionally, you know. So one has to go into this question very carefully. You know, haven't you had enough of this morning, this stuff? I think I better stop now. We'll go on after tomorrow. So if you have any questions to ask, please ask it very simply. Don't ask clever questions. Just ask questions which are really matter to you. That is, if you want.